Welcome again to the Knowledge Mobilization Flash Talk. This is a series that is in partnership with the Wisconsin Center for Education Research and the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, with some support from the U.S. Department of Education as well. Today, we are joined by Dr. Nidia Bañuelos. She is faculty in the Department of Liberal Arts and Applied Work. And she's going to be talking today about libraries as partners in knowledge mobilization. And again, as a reminder, our format is that Dr. Bañuelos is going to be giving a 5-minute flash talk, and then followed by some small group breakout discussion. And then we'll come back together for about 5 minutes to talk again. So with that, I'll let Dr. Bañuelos take it from there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annalie. I hope everyone can hear me. And thank you for coming to my talk. So my name is Nidia, and I am a former librarian and a current faculty member in the Division of Continuing Studies, and I study the history of adult education in the United States. So these two things, librarianship and adult education, they may seem somewhat unrelated, but they're actually very closely linked. Historians often think of adult education as a movement as having emerged in the 1920s. This is when educators started thinking of adults as very different kinds of learners from children with distinct needs and interests. And in the early adult education movement, libraries played a very central role. They received significant federal and philanthropic funding to offer language and citizenship classes for recent immigrants. And for example, the Ford and Carnegie Foundations donated a lot of money to turn public libraries into what they called community information centers. We see this actually practical role of the library even today, when we see citizenship, language, computer, physical, and financial health classes that libraries provide. But there's another role for libraries that we often overlook, which is exposure to the liberal arts for people who historically have not had access to this kind of education. We obviously value the liberal arts a lot in higher education. We're constantly fighting in defense of it, but we tend to think of it as something that is only for elites, for students who are 18 to 22, who can access places like the University of Wisconsin. And that's because liberal arts universities are often costly, they're selective, they're geographically dispersed. And that means low-income students in economically depressed areas, or working adults who have to take classes in the evenings or on weekends, are often encouraged to go to college to get workforce training, things that they need for their jobs. But if the liberal arts are an important part of being a human, shouldn't everyone have access to them? This is something that librarians have been thinking about for a very long time. In the 1950s, for example, the Ford Foundation started what was called the American Heritage Project, where they funded discussion groups at libraries that were designed to, quote, give the average citizen a chance to examine his heritage and decide what it stands for, to realize where we have achieved the dream of our forefathers, where we have failed, and what we might do about the failures. These groups were led by trained discussion leaders. They met a couple of times a week, and they included discussions of primary and secondary source materials, literature, and films. So in many ways, they were like the ideal undergraduate liberal arts course in sociology or history or political science, but they were for the public, and they were offered at the public library. While people of many races and socioeconomic statuses participated in these discussion groups, they were primarily operated and run by white librarians. This is an issue that the profession still struggles with today. It is not representative of the general population. It's much less racially diverse than, America at large. Today, librarians all across the country are thinking carefully about how to collect, preserve, and share knowledge from the communities that libraries have historically served, even as they work to make the profession reflect those communities better. I want to briefly share with you an example of a project that I started in collaboration with a graduate student when I was a librarian at Emory University. So as a scholar interested in the history of higher education, I noticed that many university library archives are full of material that's produced primarily by white men who used to run universities. Jonathan, who's pictured there behind the camera, and I wanted to do something small to address this. So we founded what was at the time called the Emory First Generation Oral History Archive. We used audiovisual equipment from the Center for Teaching and Learning to record interviews with students who were the very first people in their families to go to college about the process of getting to college and their experiences at Emory. And the students then donated, they gave a deed of gift of their interviews to the library and the university archives. As students recorded their interviews, they became more interested in the historical record, and they also became more interested in starting their own projects. So we helped 2 students start a first Chicano oral history archive using the same equipment and methods that we used. And now, fortunately, Jonathan has been hired as the first oral history archivist at Emory University. He's expanded the project to collect oral histories with service workers on campus and with communities in the broader Atlanta area. So the project had the immediate benefit of getting students excited about oral history and the library. It communicated to people who were historically not part of the historical record that their stories were worth preserving and that were an important part of the university's history. It also has the long-term benefit of helping future historians understand the experiences of these groups in and around campus. And as a historian of higher education, making sure that people become visible in the historical record is very important to me. So now that we've talked a little bit about the kinds of public education issues that libraries are grappling with, I wanted to ask you all about your experiences with libraries and what you envision for them in the future. So the first question that I have here is, how have you used libraries in the course of your life, both university libraries and public libraries? Do you use them differently now as an adult than you did as a child? We're also having these kind of big national conversations about things like social justice, fake news, technology overreach, and the value of the liberal arts. Many of us are also having these conversations just in our workplaces. What do you think the role of libraries is in these conversations, and what could the role of libraries be? So those are the questions to consider as we go to the breakout rooms. I don't know
Excellent,
if
thank you.
Annalise is responsible